Sure.
Here's section 1 of Their Gods Fell Before Our Guns, with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag section 1, First Contact, the arrival of the divine. They didn't come in ships. Not in the way we expected. The sky above Mars tore open like paper under a flame, revealing a cascade of golden light that shimmered against the dusty red plains. What followed was not a fleet in the traditional sense, but a procession, cathedral-shaped constructs that floated with a majestic slowness, as if gravity bowed before them. Each vessel radiated a hum that vibrated not through metal or rock, but through bone and memory, like an ancient hymn sung in a forgotten language. Across the Martian colonies, screens went static. Neural links pulsed with strange signals. Pilots dropped unconscious in their cockpits. Livestock wailed in unison. And then came the message, if it could be called that.
Not words. Not images. A compulsion.
A directive broadcast directly into the minds of every human within the solar system.
Kneel. Worship. Obey. ***.
Millions dropped to the floor, writhing or weeping, unable to understand what they felt. Some whispered names that had never existed before. Others clawed at their eyes, declaring they had seen the face of holiness. On Europa, entire cities fell to their knees without knowing why. And then, just as quickly, the sensation ended. The silence was worse. From the center of the Martian sky, the largest of the golden vessels descended. It looked like a temple carved from a single slab of celestial stone, adorned with swirling constellations etched in living light. Beneath its shadow, the Mars defense grid activated, dozens of railguns and plasma turrets locking on with cold precision. Then came Earth's first mistake. They fired. The shots never made impact. Mid-air, they dissolved into sparkling mist. Then the retaliatory strike came, not a missile, not a laser, but a blinding pulse of psionic force that flattened the defense grid and left thousands dead in an instant.
No debris. No fire.
Just silence, and ash. From that moment, the war wasn't fought over land or politics. It was about faith. The beings who emerged from the golden ships called themselves the Zelani. They did not walk, they glided. Biomechanical bodies laced with radiant filigree, 9 feet tall, draped in robes of shimmering light. Their eyes burned with artificial suns. They spoke without sound, and when they did, your own voice echoed back at you praising them. Their leader, if such a term even applied, was called the High Voice, a being who introduced itself not with a name, but a statement, ***, I am the breath of creation. The flame that whispers. ***. They claimed that humanity was theirs. That they had watched us crawl from the mud, squabble over borders, and finally reach for the stars, all in preparation for this moment. You are the children of our flame, the High Voice said. ***, it is time to come home.
But home meant servitude. Home meant obedience.
Home meant worship. Earth's response was fractured. Some nations saw the Zelani as angels, saviors, divine parents. Churches collapsed and reformed overnight. Cults sprang up like wildfire, some drinking poison to ascend, others offering human sacrifices to join the Song of Stars. Other leaders resisted. On Lunabase, a conference of human militaries and scientists attempted to analyze the Zelani's technology. It was a disaster. Every probe sent to scan their vessels returned scrambled, fried, or didn't return at all. Zelani constructs defied physics, their interiors resembling dreamscapes more than machines. They could move through solid matter.
They could bend light.
One scout team reported walking into a ship that was larger on the inside than Earth itself. And then there were the sermons. Broadcasts began interrupting communications. Cities found entire networks hijacked by what sounded like prayers. Not human prayers, alien chants, spoken in a language that felt older than time. People started hearing them in their sleep. And always the same command echoed.
Kneel. Worship. Obey. ***.
A few human colonies surrendered entirely. On Ceres, a mining settlement threw open its gates and offered its resources, and its people. The Zelani rewarded them with transformation. Ascended servants, they called them, humans stripped of identity, fused with machinery, their eyes glowing with implanted reverence. They no longer spoke of Earth. Only of the flame. But not all bent the knee. Captain Elias Thorne, a soldier from Earth's Interplanetary Command, led the last defense of Europa Station before it was overrun. In the chaos, he and his squad were captured and taken aboard a Zelani vessel. What he saw there shattered everything he believed. Inside the golden halls of the ship, beneath stained glass ceilings and floating monoliths, were prisons, cages, filled with humans. Some knelt and chanted. Others screamed. Children were plugged into learning nodes that rewrote their memories, teaching them to praise the high voice.
To love him. To die for him.
Thorn was dragged before a Zelani priest being, its voice like thunder wrapped in honey. Asterisk, you resist the divine.
Why?
Asterisk.
He spat in its face.
Later, Thorn would say that was the moment he stopped fearing gods. Because the Zelani priest flinched. And when the guards beat him unconscious, he saw the priest touch its face and look at the blood on its hand.
It was red. It wasn't divine. It was flesh. And flesh can be broken.
Would you like me to continue with section 2 next, another 700 plus words?
Certainly.
Here is section 2 of Their Gods Fell Before Our Guns, with a minimum of 700 words. Hashtag section 2, Humanity Strikes Back, the Death of False Gods.
The gods bled red.
That detail, insignificant to the Zelani, but sacred to the resistance, spread like wildfire through human networks.
It wasn't poetry. It wasn't metaphor. It was fact.
And in a universe held hostage by divinity, facts had power. Captain Elias Thorne's report was the spark. Smuggled out of a Zelani vessel by a suicide runner, an android courier that tore its way through a blockade and transmitted data as it burned in Earth's upper atmosphere. The footage was raw, shaky, but clear, a towering Zelani priest wounded.
Bleeding.
Recoiling in pain.
The world paused. Then something strange happened.
Humanity stopped kneeling. In the slums of Earth's megacities, gangs once turned religious zealots now turned on their local Zelani enforcers. In the icy mines of Neptune's moons, laborers used drill hammers and explosives to bury a temple compound beneath a kilometer of rock. On Luna, engineers reactivated ancient kinetic rail cannons mothballed since the AI rebellions. The resistance wasn't born in one place.
It erupted everywhere.
Hashtag the war cry, their gods bleed. It became the anthem of defiance. Asterisk, their gods bleed.
Ours do not. Asterisk.
Graffiti sprayed on Zelani temples. Broadcasts hijacked to repeat it in dozens of languages. Children chanting it like a pledge of allegiance. The Zelani couldn't understand it. Their empire had existed for thousands of years. In that time, no world had ever refused their divinity.
Resistance was unheard of.
Heresy was non-existent. But humanity, unpredictable, stubborn, irrational humanity, did not fear the divine.
We questioned it. We dismantled it. We shot it in the face.
Hashtag guerrilla war on a galactic scale. Zelani doctrine was rigid, built on absolute control. Their technology was superior, but dependent on a psychic network that presumed submission. Human resistance fighters quickly discovered that their enemy's greatest strength was also its weakness: they couldn't adapt. Human scientists, spurred by desperation and anger, began dissecting captured tech and corpses. The Zelani's psionic abilities were revealed not as magic, but neural enhancements powered by exotic crystals and quantum waveforms. Deadly, yes, but not invincible. On Earth, biologists and engineers created neural dampeners, helmets that blocked psychic influence. On Mercury, cyberneticists invented the Scrambler Pulse, a device that temporarily severed a Zelani's connection to the hive mind network. Once cut off, their coordination broke down. Resistance units became shadows, untraceable, unconventional. They struck at supply routes, detonated power nexuses, hacked into sermons and replaced them with old Earth war songs. One infamous example. At the Grand Cathedral on Io, moments before the Zelani high voice was to deliver a planetary commandment, the loudspeakers instead blasted a scratchy rendition of Johnny Cash's Asterisk God's Gonna Cut You Down. Asterisk. The people revolted before the last verse ended. Hashtag the Battle of Titan, the fall of a temple ship. Titan had always been a stronghold, one of the first human colonies seized during the invasion, now transformed into a floating monastery of Zelani power. Its skies were guarded by automated sentries and divine constructs.
No one thought it could be taken.
But humanity didn't care what was impossible anymore. Under the command of General Amina Cho and advised by Elias Thorne, still officially MIA, but guiding operations from the shadows, the resistance orchestrated a multi-pronged assault. Smuggled AI war drones, repurposed from ancient Terran defense projects, infiltrated the lower atmosphere. Simultaneously, guerrilla forces detonated fusion mines underneath the temple's landing core, collapsing its foundation. The climax came when a stealth ship breached the inner sanctum and planted a neural cascade device, frying every Zelani mind linked to the temple's psionic array. The entire structure, miles wide and suspended in midair, crashed into the methane sea. The explosion turned the clouds orange for days. The temple's spire jutted from the ocean like the corpse of a fallen titan. The message was clear: we can kill your gods. ##### Thorn's return and the rise of the heretic general. By the time Thorn resurfaced, he wasn't a man anymore.
He was a symbol.
Draped in stolen Zelani armor, carrying a weapon that once belonged to the high voice of Europa, Thorn became the face of humanity's revenge. His voice was gravel, his eyes sunken but burning. He refused to take command officially, instead roaming from front to front, whispering plans, uniting splinter cells, and rallying the broken. They called him the heretic general. Zelani troops began to fear him, superstitiously, irrationally. Some claimed his presence silenced their psychic field. Others whispered he could not die. The irony was perfect. The Zelani, who ruled by religious fear, now faced a human myth of their own making. #### cracks in the divine empire. The Zelani elite, those who called themselves high voices, were panicking. Their rituals no longer calmed the masses. Lesser priests began to question the doctrine in private.
Some defected.
One, a former priestess named Seraphian, publicly renounced the flame and offered the resistance detailed schematics of Zelani energy conduits.
The rift was growing.
#### Humanity redefined. This was no longer a war of survival.
It was a crusade.
The resistance adopted new mottos. * we burn their heavens. * we kill what others worship. * steal, not faith. Every human death became martyrdom.
Every strike, a sermon.
In the space of months, the myth of the Zelani collapsed.
They weren't gods. They weren't divine.
They were just another empire.
And empires fall.
Would you like Section 3, another 700+ words, next? Absolutely. Here's Section 3 of Their Gods Fell Before Our Guns, with a minimum of 700 words. ### Section 3, War of Faith, Fire on the Altars of Heaven. Humanity had always been a species driven by belief, not necessarily in gods, but in themselves. And now, that belief was weaponized. The resistance no longer hid. Earth's armies, once splintered and confused, now marched under a singular purpose: topple the throne of heaven. The Zelani, those so-called gods, had overestimated the power of fear. But they had underestimated something else entirely: the human capacity for rage. The war had moved far beyond the soul system. Now, humanity struck into the heart of Zelani space, through star lanes long held sacred, past shrines carved into asteroids and gas giants. Every world they reached bore the mark of divine oppression. Cities shaped like temples, people kneeling in psychic stupor, and entire species genetically rewritten into worshippers. But humans weren't liberators anymore. They were avengers. And they had come to burn the stars. #### Operation Exodus, the invasion begins. The first major offensive was codenamed Operation Exodus, a joint effort between Earth's Fleet Command, the Resistance Council, and allied species that had secretly resisted Zelani control for centuries. Human warships, retrofitted with psionic shielding and prototype FTL drives reverse-engineered from fallen Zelani tech, pierced the outer rim of the Halorian expanse, a region of space revered as a holy frontier. The target, Coravale, a fortress world known to house the Zelani's memory banks, ancient databases of divine law, encoded across centuries of conquest.
The plan was clear.
Destroy their scripture. Cripple their soul. ****. What humanity found, however, was worse than expected. Coravale wasn't a library.
It was a slaughterhouse.
Tens of thousands of heretic species had been imprisoned there, entire civilizations erased from history and rewritten into servitude. Their minds were tethered to psychic engines, their identities consumed to power the Zelani's divine network. Captain Idris Vega, commander of the assault fleet, stood in silent horror as he watched a recording of one such ritual. A priest, unblinking and serene, descended upon a crowd of prisoners.
They didn't scream. They smiled.
Their consciousness was peeled away like skin. Vega gave the order: no survivors. Burn it all. ****. The human fleet leveled the entire moon with synchronized kinetic bombardment. The explosions could be seen from orbit like great crosses of fire. No Zelani priests escaped. And thus began a pattern. #### Faith versus fury, the war becomes sacred. To the Zelani, war had always been a ceremony. Soldiers chanted prayers in battle. Weapons were sanctified before use. Losses were considered divine sacrifice. But humanity fought without ritual. They used whatever they had. Improvised explosives.
EMP bursts.
Scrambled frequencies. They didn't wait for the trumpet, They kicked down the gates. The Zelani began to fracture. Their doctrine had no answer for a foe that refused to play by their rules. Young Zelani, raised on tales of obedience, started whispering doubts. Some asked questions. Others went further. A movement grew in the shadows. The unbound. Zelani civilians and low-ranked acolytes who no longer believed.
They hacked sermons.
They sabotaged rituals. Some joined the humans outright. The resistance broadcasted their manifesto galaxy-wide.
You were told we were children. But children grow teeth.
And now we are hungry. Battle of Etherian, when heaven burned. Etherian was their holiest world. A gas giant surrounded by massive rings of stone temples, where Zelani high voices communed with the divine stream that powered their psychic grid. For over 3,000 years, no outsider had set foot on it.
Until the humans came.
Led by Thorn and a newly defector priest named Seraphian, Earth's forces launched a coordinated strike. Fighters swarmed the orbital cathedrals, while boarding parties breached the temples and planted scrambler mines in their cores. The resistance had learned from Titan. This time, they didn't aim to disable. They aimed to desecrate. Thorn himself led the charge into the central temple, once believed to house the soul of the flame. He carved through Zelani defenders with a plasma blade wrapped in neural disruptors, flanked by unbound defectors chanting in reverse of the Zelani creed. The temple collapsed in a vortex of fire and ash. For the first time in Zelani history, heaven was on fire. The cost of divine vengeance. The human victory was total.
But it was not clean.
In their campaign to end Zelani rule, the resistance did things that blurred the line between justice and genocide. Cities that refused to surrender were bombarded from orbit. Survivors were interrogated using memory-breaking algorithms. Entire temples full of brainwashed civilians were collapsed, just in case they would rise again. The human soldiers, once liberators, became instruments of reckoning. Some resisted the shift. Others embraced it. "Do not mistake us for angels," General Cho said in a broadcast, her face cold, her armor scorched from battle. "We are not here to save you. We are here to end your gods." Celastaris beckons, the final stronghold. Beyond the burning worlds and shattered temples lay one last sanctuary, Celastaris.
The heart of the Zelani faith.
A planet-sized construct orbiting a dying star, where the oldest high voices lived in stasis. From there, all divine directives flowed. It was never meant to be reached. Its defenses were absolute.
Its orbit unstable.
Its atmosphere toxic to all non-divine beings.
But it didn't matter. Humanity was coming.
And this time, they brought all the fire of Earth with them. Would you like Section 4, final section, written next with 700+ words?
Absolutely.
Here is Section 4 of Their Gods Fell Before Our Guns, with a minimum of 700 words. Section 4, The Fall of Heaven, Their Gods Fell Before Our Guns.
Celastaris.
It was the final beacon of Zelani divinity, an impossibility forged in orbit around a dying star. A planet-sized fortress built from stellar alloys and psionic latticework, its rings pulsed with hymns broadcast through spacetime itself. Every surface of the world was a monument to the Zelani's dominion over reality. Every spire sang with the power of belief. From this throne world, divine commands had once reshaped galactic histories. Now it was humanity's target. From the shattered ruins of Coravale to the burning skies of Etherian, the human resistance had torn its way through the Zelani Empire. They didn't come offering surrender. They came with fire. And fire was all they intended to leave behind. The siege begins, storming the throne of the gods. The combined fleet of Earth, the Resistance and their unbound Zelani allies assembled in orbit, thousands of warships, carriers, dreadnoughts and drones. It was the largest armada ever assembled by a species that once thought of itself as alone. Humanity had brought every weapon, every ship, every scrap of tech salvaged from Zelani wreckage. Orbital bombardment, AI-managed tactical nukes, psionic disruptor satellites, even gravity warpers reverse-engineered from ancient relics. The plan was brutal, final, and unforgiving.
Break the shield. Breach the core.
Kill the gods. Celastaris did not beg.
It did not speak.
Its answer came in blinding light as stellar lances rained from its defense grid. Entire human cruisers evaporated in an instant. Hundreds of thousands died in the opening salvo.
But Earth did not falter.
Thorn led the ground assault personally, flanked by Seraphian, the defector priest who had once chanted the names of the high voices. Now he carried an unholy weapon crafted from Zelani and human parts, a blade that screamed when it moved, tuned to the frequencies of divine thought. It was the heretic and the traitor together, walking toward the gates of godhood to set them on fire. ####The battle within, gods die in silence. The interior of Celastaris was madness made tangible. The architecture shifted in defiance of geometry. Rooms that had no end, staircases that led to memories, halls that echoed back your own voice, twisted into prayer. The defenders were no longer soldiers, but avatars, Zelani whose bodies had become psionic foci, fused with machinery, hovering like angels of light and vengeance. But humanity had learned. Every soldier carried a neural disruptor. Every drone was shielded against psychic interference. Every strike was precise, uncompromising, and aimed for the heart. Thorn's team carved through the inner sanctum, using unbound operatives to guide them. The closer they got to the core, the more erratic the resistance became. Some Zelani priests dropped to their knees, weeping in confusion. Others screamed prayers so loud it shattered glass. In the chamber of communion, where the high voices had once sung unity across galaxies, they found the last of the divine hierarchy.
6 beings.
Taller than all the rest. Faces hidden behind golden veils, skin flickering with solar fire, still tethered to the star itself. They hovered in stasis, unaging, broadcasting psychic pressure so strong several human troops began bleeding from the nose and ears on approach. Seraphian stepped forward. He deactivated the harmonics shielding the chamber and addressed his former gods directly. "You taught us that doubt was death.
You were wrong. Doubt is freedom.
And now we set you free." Before the high voices could respond, Thorn pulled the trigger on a customized psionic core bomb, a device designed not to explode, but to erase consciousness within a radius of thought. The high voices did not die screaming. They simply vanished. ###collapse of the divine grid. With the high voices gone, the neural lattice that connected Zelani society collapsed. Billions of worshippers across the stars suddenly felt nothing.
No presence. No command. No god.
Ships drifted without direction. Soldiers dropped their weapons in shock. In temple cities across the galaxy, Zelani citizens began tearing down their own idols, screaming, sobbing, or laughing hysterically. Without the psychic anchor of the divine grid, the entire empire unraveled in hours. What comes after gods? Celastaris was stripped of its weapons and monuments. Its core was converted into a neutral sanctuary, a reminder of what had fallen. The resistance refused to claim it. Instead, a monument was erected in the ruins of the Chamber of Communion. * Here fell the last gods. Let no tyrant rise in their place. * Thorn declined any title or leadership. When asked why he didn't crown himself emperor or warden of the galaxy, his reply was simple. We didn't kill gods to become them. He vanished weeks later, some say into exile, others say into death. Seraphian became the first of the Unbound Council, overseeing the integration of Zelani survivors and liberated species. Humanity, once fragmented and weak, now stood as the most feared and respected force in the galaxy.
But they carried scars.
Entire planets had been burned.
Billions had died.
And in their fury, humans had walked a knife's edge between justice and annihilation. Many asked, were we heroes? Or were we simply gods of a different kind? ###epilogue, the stars remember. A century later, children still whisper the story under alien moons and station domes. Of a time when the divine came with golden wings. Of a time when Earth said no. And of the final words carved into the hull of the last Zelani temple, now drifting in silence. They came as gods.
They died as cowards. We met them with steel.
And ended their heaven with fire. Would you like a complete compiled version of the entire 2,800+ word outline and story so far in one document?